Jeffrey Epstein. Madam Ghislaine Maxwell made secret visits to Buckingham Palace to see Prince Andrew, claims ex-police officer as royal faces growing questions over relationship with pedophile. A former police officer has claimed that Jeffrey Epstein's Madam Ghislaine Maxwell made several secret visits to Buckingham Palace to visit Prince Andrew. Paul Page, who served in the Royal Protection Command from 1998 until 2004, alleged that Maxwell and several other women made trips to the palace to meet with the Duke of York. He said that the female guests wouldn't sign the palace's gate book and royal protection officers would even drive them home, or face an angry Andrew who'd become abusive if challenged. The Duke of York is under intense scrutiny over his close relationship with pedophile billionaire Jeffrey Epstein after he killed himself in a Manhattan prison 2 weeks ago. Video obtained by the Mail on Sunday shows Andrew waving to a woman from inside Epstein's New York mansion, and the royal has been dogged by claims by Epstein's alleged sex slave Virginia Roberts that she slept with him 3 times. The prince categorically denies Roberts' allegations, and there is no suggestion he slept with underage women. The palace also issued a statement calling Mr. Page's claims unsubstantiated and drawing attention to his conviction for fraud and his time spent in prison. It comes as he faces further lurid allegations of having had more than 1,000 lovers, according to The Sun. Maxwell has been accused of acting as a madam and recruiting girls to become sex slaves for Epstein, though she has denied the claims. Ex-Med officer Page made the allegations against the Duke of York during a 2009 trial where he was accused of £3 million investment fraud. Page's statement was never disclosed to the jury but have now been revealed for the first time. According to the Mirror, Page claimed, "It was not just the royalty protection officers who abused their position, members of the royal household also frequently did. The biggest culprit was Prince Andrew. Andrew would often have lady friends come to visit, including frequent visits by Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of the disgraced late Robert Maxwell." Page was found guilty of the fraud and was given 6 years in jail, though his boss, former chief superintendent and head of royal protection Di Davies, confirmed some of his claims. He said, "This did happen. Royals can bring their own guests into the palace unvetted and unchecked. That's their prerogative. It is their home. Unless there was anything that would give cause for concern, royal officers could not intervene." It was particularly the case with that individual who had a reputation for being fairly succinct with his words if police tried to intervene. He has been known to be abrupt with police, including myself on occasions. It's fair to say and well documented that he was involved with a number of fairly glamorous good-looking young ladies, but I have never been aware, then or since, that any were underage. Buckingham Palace told Mail Online, during the trial, which resulted in a conviction for fraud, Mr. Page made a series of allegations about the royal household and members of the royal family, none of which were substantiated. It comes as the Duke of York has told friends he fears never being able to return to the U.S. with the Jeffrey Epstein case hanging over his head. Andrew has not set foot in the country since early 2017, and sources say plans to launch a business initiative there later this year have been put on ice. According to the Mail sources, the prince is concerned about being drawn into civil proceedings brought by some of pedophile Epstein's many victims. At least 5 women who say they were abused by the financier have filed lawsuits against his £458 million estate after he was found hanged in his New York prison cell on August 10 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. Since Epstein's arrest last month, Andrew has been trying to distance himself from his old friend, declaring himself appalled by reports of the alleged crimes. But the efforts have been undermined by the emergence of details of how he hosted the pedophile at Balmoral, and by pictures of the royal at Epstein's New York mansion in 2010, 2 years after the banker had been convicted of sex with a child. The insider told the Mail, "Andrew has openly said he can't see how he can go back to the US at the moment with everything that is going on. I know this is a source of enormous frustration for him, as it is one of his favorite places in the world to go." The source said that the prince had held high hopes of taking his successful Pitch at Palace scheme, the Dragon's Den-style initiative for entrepreneurs, to the States in the next year or so. It's something he is believed to have raised when U.S. President Donald Trump, another former friend of Epstein, came to the UK for his state visit earlier this year. The two men had already met when Mr. Trump threw a private lunch for Andrew at Trump Tower on a visit to New York in September 2006. But the source added, plans to take pigs to the US have definitely been put on ice for the time being. Andrew is very disappointed as he has long been very keen to get a foothold out there with it. Andrew's friendship with Epstein goes back to at least 1999. In 2000, the financier and his ex-girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of the late newspaper tycoon Robert Maxwell, were invited by Andrew to a party at Windsor Castle thrown by the Queen. Miss Maxwell, also a friend of Andrew, has been accused by some of Epstein's victims of being his procurer, a charge she denies. Epstein and Miss Maxwell were also guests of Andrew at the Queen's Sandringham and Balmoral estates and holidayed with him in Florida and Thailand. In 2011, Andrew was forced to quit as a UK trade envoy after being pictured meeting Epstein following his release from a child sex jail term. Andrew traveled to the States twice on official business in 2013, taking in Florida, California, and New York, but there was no publicly recorded trip in either 2014, 2015 or 2016. He visited again in May 2017, traveling around California, but has not gone back since and has no plans to go for the foreseeable future. One of the women who have filed lawsuits against Epstein's estate, Virginia Roberts, now Giuffre, has also claimed she was forced by Epstein to have sex with Andrew on 3 occasions between 1999 and 2001. The allegations, first made in 2015, were officially struck from the court records by a judge, who ruled they were immaterial, and there is no suggestion Andrew has anything to personally fear in respect of those allegations. Traveled back to the US. Just days ago, Miss Roberts' lawyer Brad Edwards urged the prince to cooperate in order to help the victims of Epstein secure justice. He said, "I look forward to coordinating a formal deposition where he will be given the opportunity to tell us everything he knows." US legal experts say that if Andrew is considered to have information relevant to any of the civil proceedings, someone might want to depose him, ask him to give a statement. It is also possible he could be considered a witness in any criminal proceedings surrounding Epstein's death. Lawyers say it would be difficult to force him to go to the US to give evidence, but if he were to set foot in the country, he could be subpoenaed for his testimony. In response to the Mail story, Buckingham Palace said, "We would not comment on alleged conversations or the speculative premise behind the question, but would point out that the case you are referring to relates to proceedings in the United States, to which the Duke of York is not a party. Any suggestion of impropriety with underage minors is categorically untrue. It is emphatically denied that the Duke of York had any form of sexual contact or relationship with Virginia Roberts. Any claim to the contrary is false and without foundation." A source said that when working as special representative for international trade and investment between 2001 and 2011, Andrew was asked to travel regularly to the US. Since relinquishing this role in 2011, they maintained Andrew had continued to travel to the US, but claimed that his focus, particularly with pig chip palaces, had been on other markets. "At that point I realized that the recipient of Irina's foot massage was His Royal Highness, Prince Andrew, Duke of York," he told a client in an email exchange published in a US magazine. The incident, which appears to date from early 2011 following Epstein's release from prison on a child sex conviction, provides further potentially compromising evidence of the Duke's relationship with the alleged pedophile and sex trafficker. Although Buckingham Palace refused to comment yesterday on Mr. Brockman's account, it will put further pressure on Prince Andrew to explain his involvement with Epstein. The financier was found hanged in his jail cell on August 10 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. Commenting on behalf of the prince, a palace spokesman said last night, "We would reiterate our earlier statement, any suggestion of impropriety with underage minors is categorically untrue." Mr. Brockman's description of his brief encounter with Andrew, which a palace insider insisted was not an account we recognize, would roughly tally with a reported 4-day stay he had at Epstein's home over Christmas in 2010. The prince was guest of honor at a welcome home party for Epstein, recently released from a Florida prison. During his stay, a string of attractive young women were pictured coming and going. In a recently released video, the Duke was seen furtively waving goodbye to one, later identified as former Australian Prime Minister Paul Keating's daughter Catherine. Mr. Brockman has now shed light on what might have been going on behind the front door of Epstein's palatial 71st Street home. Others who mixed with Epstein have also recounted how his royal friend was referred to simply as Andy and how they didn't immediately realize who he was. Mr. Brockman's meeting with the prince was revealed by science writer Yevgeny Morozov, who Mr. Brockman had urged to meet Epstein, a generous donor to scientific projects. In an email exchange dated September 2013, Mr. Brockman wrote, "Last time I visited his house, the largest private residence in NYC, I walked in to find him in a sweatsuit and a British guy in a suit with suspenders braces, getting foot massages from two young well-dressed Russian women. After grilling me for a while about cybersecurity, the Brit, named Andy, was commenting on the Swedish authorities and the charges against Julian Assange. We think they're liberal in Sweden, but it's more like Northern England as opposed to Southern Europe," he said. The Duke, said Mr. Brockman, added, "In Monaco, Albert works 12 hours a day, but at 9 p.m., when he goes out, he does whatever he wants, and nobody cares. But if I do it, I'm in big trouble." Mr. Brockman said he only then realized who he was talking to. He said that a week later, the New York Post ran a picture of Andrew and Epstein walking in Central Park under the headline "The Prince and the Perv." In the ensuing furor, the Duke gave up his role as UK trade ambassador. Mr. Morozov said Mr. Brockman was clearly acting as Epstein's PR man, vaguely plus, mentioning his controversial history in the email by saying he got into trouble and spent a year in jail in Florida. The prince said last week that he was appalled by the reports of Epstein's alleged crimes.